He was a struggling pastor desperate to save his dying church. She was a brilliant atheist working as a high-end escort to pay for her philosophy doctorate. When he hired her to write sermons that would pack the pews, neither expected that she would end up converting him. Not to religion, but to a completely different understanding of what faith really means. Pastor David Matthews was drowning in his own mediocrity at 38. Once full of fire and conviction, he now stood before empty pews every Sunday, delivering uninspired sermons to a congregation that had dwindled from 200 to barely 30 regular attendees. Tall and still handsome despite the stress lines creeping around his eyes, David had inherited Grace Community Church from his father, along with crushing debt and a building desperately in need of repairs. His sandy brown hair was always perfectly styled, his suits pressed and proper, but inside he felt like a fraud. His faith had become routine, his prayers felt hollow, and his sermons were recycled platitudes that even he didn't fully believe anymore. Sophia was everything David's world would consider scandalous. At 29, she was pursuing her PhD in philosophy while working as a high-end escort to pay for her education. Strikingly beautiful with long black hair, intelligent dark eyes, and a wit sharp enough to cut glass, Sophia had been raised in a strict Christian household before rejecting faith entirely in college. She was brilliant, fluent in 4 languages, well-versed in theology, literature, and philosophy, with a mind that could dissect complex arguments with surgical precision. Her escort work wasn't born of desperation, but of pragmatism. It paid better than any teaching assistant position and gave her the flexibility to focus on her studies. To her clients, she offered intelligent conversation as much as companionship, becoming a confidant to powerful men who needed someone smart enough to truly understand them. Their world should never have intersected. David spent his days trying to save souls, while Sophia had long ago concluded that souls were a comforting fiction. He preached about divine love and eternal purpose. She believed life was a beautiful accident in an indifferent universe. Yet both were trapped in their own forms of performance. David pretending to feel a faith that had grown cold. Sophia pretending her work didn't sometimes leave her feeling empty despite her philosophical certainty. The crisis came when the church board delivered an ultimatum. Increase attendance by 50% within 6 months or face closure. David's salary had already been cut twice, and the congregation could no longer afford basic maintenance. That night, alone in his study surrounded by theological books that felt like relics from someone else's life, David faced the truth. He was failing at the one thing he'd been called to do. The idea came to him during a moment of desperate clarity. He'd always been terrible at writing sermons that truly moved people, but what if he could find someone who understood how to reach hearts and minds? Someone who could craft words that would make people feel something real again. David's search led him through freelance writing websites and academic forums until he found her, a philosophy PhD student whose writing samples revealed an extraordinary ability to make complex ideas accessible and emotionally resonant. Her essays on meaning, morality, and human connection were more moving than anything he'd written in years. What he didn't realize when he contacted Escort was that he was hiring someone whose worldview was a complete opposite of everything he claimed to represent. When Sophia received the inquiry, she was intrigued despite herself. A pastor wanted to pay her substantial money to write sermons? The irony was too delicious to pass up. She agreed to a meeting, curious to see what kind of desperate religious leader would outsource his own spiritual message. Their first encounter in a neutral coffee shop was electric with tension. David, expecting a fellow believer, was shocked to find himself face-to-face with a sophisticated woman who radiated confidence and intelligence. Sophia, amused by the situation, decided to be direct. "You should know before we go any further, Pastor Matthews, that I'm an atheist, a very committed one. Are you sure you want someone like me writing your sermons?" David should have walked away. Every instinct told him this was wrong, dangerous, possibly blasphemous. But looking at this brilliant woman, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years, genuine curiosity about what she might say. What would an atheist tell a Christian congregation? He asked. Sophia smiled. The truth about what it means to be human. The real questions about suffering, love, hope, and meaning. The difference is, I'd do it without promising easy answers or divine intervention. What began as a desperate business arrangement slowly transformed into something neither had anticipated. Sophia agreed to write David's sermons, but with conditions. She would write about universal human experiences and moral truths without invoking specific religious doctrine. David, backed into a corner, agreed. The first sermon Sophia wrote was about forgiveness, not as a divine commandment, but as a gift people give themselves to break free from the prison of resentment. She wove together philosophy, psychology, and human stories to create something that was deeply spiritual without being explicitly religious. David delivered it with more passion than he'd felt in years, because for the first time in a long time, he truly believed in what he was saying. The response was immediate. People stayed after the service to talk. New faces appeared the following week. Sophia's sermons addressed real struggles, loneliness, purpose, fear, love, with intellectual honesty and emotional depth that David's traditional approach had never achieved. As weeks passed, David and Sophia began meeting regularly to discuss upcoming sermons. What started as business meetings became philosophical conversations that stretched for hours. David found himself challenged by Sophia's brilliant mind and uncompromising honesty, while Sophia was surprised by David's genuine desire to help people, even if she disagreed with his methods. You know what's interesting about your congregation? Sophia observed one evening as they worked in David's study. They're not coming for doctrine. They're coming because they feel seen, understood. They're getting something real for the first time. David looked uncomfortable, but they think it's coming from God. They think I'm channeling divine inspiration. Maybe you are, Sophia said with a slight smile. Maybe divine inspiration looks a lot like human wisdom and compassion. Maybe your God works through atheist philosophers who happen to understand people better than most pastors. The church continued to grow. Sophia's sermons tackled difficult topics: doubt, suffering, the search for meaning in an uncertain world, with a depth and honesty that drew people hungry for authentic spiritual exploration. David delivered them with increasing conviction, finding that Sophia's words often expressed truths he felt but never been able to articulate. Their working relationship deepened into something more complex. David found himself looking forward to their meetings not just for the sermons, but for Sophia herself. Her intelligence fascinated him, her passion for truth challenged him, and her unexpected moments of vulnerability revealed depths he hadn't anticipated. Sophia, meanwhile, began to see past David's clerical collar to the genuinely caring man beneath, someone struggling with his own doubts and searching for authentic ways to serve others. The turning point came during their preparation for a sermon about authentic living. As they debated the nature of truth and authenticity, their conversation became intensely personal. How can you stand up there every week pretending to have faith you're not sure you feel? Sophia asked bluntly. David was quiet for a long moment. How can you write these beautiful sermons about hope and meaning when you believe life is ultimately meaningless? Because meaning isn't something the universe gives us, Sophia replied. It's something we create. And watching your congregation find comfort, purpose, community, that's meaningful regardless of whether God exists. So you're saying the sermons work because they're true on a human level, even if they're not true on a divine level? I'm saying maybe the distinction doesn't matter as much as you think it does. That night, David couldn't sleep. For months, he'd been delivering Sophia's words with growing conviction, but he'd assumed it was because she was helping him express his faith more effectively. Now he wondered if the opposite was true, if his faith was actually evolving to match the wisdom in her sermons. The crisis came when a longtime church member, Mrs. Henderson, approached David after service with concerns. She'd done some research and discovered that one of his recent sermons contained ideas remarkably similar to those of certain atheist philosophers. Pastor, I'm worried about the direction these sermons are taking. They're moving people, yes, but are they moving them toward God or away from Him? David realized he didn't know the answer anymore. More troubling, he wasn't sure he cared about the distinction the way he once had. The confrontation came when David discovered that some congregation members had figured out he wasn't writing his own sermons. Worse, they'd identified Sophia and learned about her background, not just her atheism, but her work as an escort. The revelation threatened to destroy everything they'd built. They know David told Sophia when he arrived at her apartment that evening, his usual composure completely shattered. About the sermons, about you, about everything. Sophia poured herself a glass of wine with steady hands. What are you going to do? I don't know. The board wants me to denounce you publicly, distance myself from your influence, go back to traditional preaching. They're saying you corrupted the church, corrupted me. Have I? Sophia asked quietly. David looked at her, this brilliant, complex woman who challenged everything he thought he knew about faith, truth, and himself. Yes, he said finally. You've corrupted my certainty. You've corrupted my ability to pretend I have all the answers. You've corrupted my willingness to offer people empty comfort instead of honest struggle. And is that a bad thing? David realized it wasn't. No, it's the most honest I've been in years. The next Sunday, David stood before his congregation, larger now than it had been in a decade, and told them the truth. He explained about Sophia, about her role in writing the sermons, about her beliefs and her background. He talked about his honesty, about how she had changed him, how her wisdom had helped him find a more authentic way to serve his community. I know some of you feel betrayed, he said, looking out at faces ranging from confused and angry to surprisingly supportive. But I want you to ask yourselves, have these sermons helped you? Have they brought you closer to what matters most? Have they made you more loving, more compassionate, more honest about your own struggles? The church split. About half the congregation left, unable to accept David's revelation or his continued partnership with Sophia. But the half that remained formed a stronger, more vibrant community than the church had ever been. They were people drawn not to religious certainty, but to authentic spiritual exploration. Sophia began attending services regularly, not as a convert, but as a participant in a community that is genuinely seeking truth. She eventually became an official part of the church's ministry, leading the discussion group and writing liturgy that honored her questions as much as answers. David's faith had evolved into something he'd never expected, less about divine doctrine and more about human connection, less about having answers and more about wrestling with the right questions. He and their relationship had deepened beyond professional collaboration into something that honored both their differences and their shared commitment to truth. A year later, the church had grown again, attracting more people from diverse backgrounds who were drawn to its intellectual honesty and emotional authenticity. David and Sophia's partnership had become the foundation of a new kind of spiritual community, one that welcomed out alongside faith, questions alongside answers. In quiet moments, David sometimes wondered if this had been God's plan all along, to send him an atheist angel who would teach him that how faith wasn't really about having truly the right beliefs, but about having the courage to keep seeking truth wherever it led. Sophia, for her part, had found something she'd never expected in a church, a community that valued her mind, honored her questions, and appreciated her contributions without requiring her to abandon her intellectual integrity. She hadn't found God, but she'd found something equally precious, a place where her authentic self was not just accepted but celebrated. Sometimes the most profound faith comes not from having all the answers, but from having the courage to question everything you think you know. Truth has a way of emerging in the most unexpected places, through the most unlikely messengers, when you're open enough to listen and brave enough to be changed by what you hear. If you like that story, please subscribe for more. Thank you, and until next time.